Good morning. Okay. Seems that it's working now.
Yes. Give it a little test.
Okay. Check.
Okay, yeah, for you.
Okay, while we are trying to get better sound with the mic, let me welcome you here in the Scandinavia House. Excellencies, colleagues, all and new friends. Good morning. So my name is Laetitia Demare, and I am the Director of Climate Analytics here in New York. Thank you for being here today, braving the elements and all the security barriers. We went through the barricades, I'm sure, to get to us today. So thank you. As you know, the Climate Week opens today, and we are very happy to contribute to this series of events for the second time. Some of you may have joined our previous event here in April, just before the signing ceremony of the Paris Agreement. It was the 22nd of April. It was a high-level event that was very much anticipated. And I have to say, I cannot help but be amazed by the progress that we have achieved since April. Back then, in April, we could barely imagine that the Paris Agreement could enter into force in 2016. And with the recent developments with China and the US, Brazil joining the agreement, and many more countries, now it's not a question of if the Paris Agreement will enter into force this year. It's more a question of when. Before Marrakesh, at Marrakesh, after Marrakesh. But I think what has been achieved in the last few months and weeks is really tremendous. As you know, there will be another high-level event in 2 days at the UN, hosted by the UN Secretary General, a ratification event inviting countries to expedite their ratification process and to ensure the entry into force of the treaty this year. Climate Analytics, through its ratification tracker, has been following countries' ratification, has been monitoring the announcements made by countries. So as you can see on the screen, this is where we stand now, but we are expecting a lot more countries to join the agreement in the next 48 hours. And our team at Climate Analytics will be following the event on Wednesday, and we'll be updating real time this tracker. So please go on our website if you want the latest on the ratification. So of course, the prospect of having the Paris Agreement entering into force this year is fantastic news. This means that the provision of the Paris Agreement will become legally binding. Here today, we will not go into details of the climate negotiations, all of the modalities and processes that have to be elaborated for the implementation of the agreement. This is something that we'll be discussing in Morocco, in Marrakesh, in November. And I think we have some representatives from the Morocco mission in the room. Thank you for being here. So a lot of work ahead of the presidency and the negotiators. So good luck with coming up with a robust work plan. So today, what we wanted to do is to look deeper into the objective of the agreement. To go deeper into the objective. What is the difference between 2 degrees and 1.5, since we have both limits in Article 2, from a scientific perspective, but also from a policy perspective, economic perspective, and what are the challenges, opportunities, and benefits for sustainable development of staying below the 1.5 limit. So this event will be in 2 parts. First, we will have our presenters from Climate Analytics. They will provide us insights and background on the feasibility of the 1.5 degrees limit, whether we are on track, how we will get there. They will also outline what are the risks and damages that will be avoided by staying below the limit. And what are the benefits for global prosperity, including growth, food security, energy independence, health and livelihood, all those issues that I'm sure you are very familiar with if you've been involved in the SDG process. Then after the presentation, we will have a few minutes for questions, and we'll take a short coffee break. After the break, our distinguished panelists will share with us their perspective on these issues. So we are very fortunate today. We have a fantastic panel. We have with us today a world-famous prominent scientist, Dr. Oppenheimer. We are also with us Mr. Nathaniel Green, who's an expert in solutions of climate change, especially in renewable energy. On our panel as well, Dr. James Fletcher, who's been in the trenches of the negotiation and played a key role in crafting the Paris Agreement. And we will be joined later by Mr. Selwyn Hart, who's currently advising the UN Secretary General on climate issues. So during this event, you are welcome to tweet. We would love if you could tag us at CA_latest. So as this is the three handles that you can also use. The climate handle, the 105C handle, and the CW NYC, which is Climate Week New York City. So that would be great if we could get all these messages out to the social media. But without further delay, now I'd like to thank you again for being here today. Please participate, engage with our presenters, with our panelists. We want this event to be really a frank discussion, ask questions. Again, thanks for our fantastic panelists and experts to be here today. So now let me introduce our first presenter. So, it's right in front of me. So Dr. Karl Schlosser. Karl is a physicist at Climate Analytics. He's very great with climate models. He's an author and co-author of a range of peer-reviewed scientific publications, as well as leading reports, such as reports commissioned by the World Bank. You have some of the leaflets over there summarizing the findings of those reports. He has done research on a lot of things, from stability of the ocean circulation to climate disasters and conflicts, and lots more. He has also advised small island developing states and least developed countries negotiators in the UNFCCC process, and he's a guest scientist at the Potsdam Institute of Climate Research. So please join me in welcoming him to the stage.
Yeah, thank you, Letitia, and also good morning from my side. I'll start a little presentation session now with an introduction on the science update on 1.5 weeks. So this is the headline of our event. So 1.5 weeks now, I'll give you a natural scientist perspective on this question. So now I want to start with a figure that I guess many of you are familiar. So please raise your hand if you have seen this figure over the course of the last year. Okay, very good. And please raise your hand again if you've seen this figure in the context of the questioning if the 1.5 million is already reached or whatever. Yeah. Okay. So less people raising their hands. So that's very good. But I think nevertheless it's worth discussing this a little bit, as 2016 it has been an exceptionally warm year. We have seen several temperature records being shattered over the course of the year. And we find that it's probably useful to put this in perspective of what climate predictions tell us and what the climate science issues around these questions are, and how this eventually relates to 1.5 degree long-term temperature limit. So first of all, as I said, 2016 has been a truly extreme year so far in terms of temperature. So 2015 was already about 1 degree warmer than pre-industrial levels, and since then, at the end of 2015, we had an extreme El Niño event reaching well into 2016. And until August this year, so the latest month, we have data on, there has been consecutive monthly temperature records for each month following. So basically, August 2016 was the 11th month in a row where there was a monthly temperature record. And therefore, it seems very likely that 2016 will also be the question is now, how do individual monthly records relate to a long-term trend or to a long-term warming, and what of this is actually due to natural variability in the climate system, and how much of this is actually really related to climate change and to concepts like long-term temperature. So showing you here is monthly variations above pre-industrial levels and always above pre-industrial levels from the other distant temperature record over the last 30 years and a 30-year long-term trend. And what you can clearly see is there to the very right, there's this high spike, which is early 2016, February, March, which even for monthly values would be more than 1.5 degree above the industrial level for this particular record of other climates. The mean temperature estimates is slightly a bit lower, but nevertheless, what you can also see from this graph is there's lots of up and downs, lots of wiggles. So this is what scientists call natural variability in the climate system. So you'll see that, for example, for the 1 degree line, which is also dashed there, there's been individual months already in the 90s that were reaching up to 1 degree, although officially, let's say, or for the attributable warming trend, only 1 degree was actually reached last year, so 2015. And already around 1995, so 20 years before that, we had individual months that were actually reaching 1 degree. So this puts probably these individual temperature records that we have for this year into perspective, because it tells you that there is a substantial difference between a long-term temperature trend on attributable warming and what you would see from a monthly temperature record. And this is important to distinguish because if we talk about a 1.5 degree limit, we talk about a long-term temperature limit. And how this is generally understood in science is that it would be something like at least 20-year annual average or other scientific methods to differentiate between the fraction of attributable warming and what actually stems from natural variability. And it certainly doesn't mean that individual years or months should be taken as face value compared to such a long-term temperature. So it can very well be that individual years or months can exceed that by a substantial margin, but nevertheless, the long-term temperature trend, the actual attributable warming we have due to climate change, is still not as high as these records. And just to illustrate this a bit further, I took a typical 1.5 degree scenario, something like we would get out of energy technological models that would be assessed in the context of the IPCC report. And this is the thick blue line over there. And then I added just determined anomalies from the 20th century record. So this is really just for illustrative purposes. So this is not a projection, nothing like that. It just shows you if this would be following the also multi-decadal patterns in annual anomalies in temperature of the 20th century, you would very well, even in this 1.5 degree scenario, you would have several years vastly exceeding 1.5 degrees. You have years that are lower, you have years that are higher. But it tells you that this is something to be expected, so to say, in particular, as we are getting closer and closer to 1.5 and also to 2 degree level. So due to natural variability in the climate system on the monthly, but also on the annual and probably even the multi-annual timescale, we would expect that we would exceed this long-term average. And this is important to distinguish and to be put in perspective also with our scientific understanding of where we are. And this is a plot that I took from the Real Climate, where they compare the current temperature estimates from different data sources. So now it's not just NASA, which is the red line, but it's also NOAA had put forward an independent estimate with the range from the IPCC CMIP 5 models, which is their indicated gray. And you probably all may recall that over the last 10, 15 years, we actually had a substantial debate about warming in the 80s. So based on why we would not, the warming signal we were seeing in our observations were not as fast as the models were projecting, was slowing down, all this debate. And you can see that there, right? You know, the old trend, and then following the over 2000s, probably not as much. But what you see now is basically we're just back on track. So 2015 we're just right in the middle of what our models would project. And 2016, which is there indicated as an estimate of where we may land, maybe a little bit above the multi-ensemble mean, but not substantially outside the range that we would expect from our IPCC model. So it doesn't, we're not experiencing something exceptional. You could rather say we're actually experiencing going back to normal. So even though we have a very intense El Niño event, what drives our signal here is really in particular that we are getting back to what we would expect from a long-term trend and also from our scientific understanding of long-term warming and natural variability. So there is no discrepancy between what we see in this year in 2016, no large discrepancy. There are obviously interesting questions that are raised by what we are currently seeing and the phenomena that are going on in the Arctic in particular. But there's nothing fundamentally that we are missing in terms of our scientific understanding. It's pretty much in line with what we would have thought. And there's certainly not questioning the feasibility of a 1.5 degree warming limit. Having that said, I want to quickly embark on just indicating what, how these feasible or what energy economic scenarios would look like that would get us to 1.5 degrees by the end of the 20th century. I just a little bit preparing what the Marseille would then go into greater detail later. So this is a publication where climate scientists have been involved that was published in the Journal of Climate Change last year on the requirements of energy system transformation for 1.5 degrees. And what is important to understand basically requires the same technological transformation as a 2-degree limit during the 21st century. It just needs to be ramped up substantially. So we need more decarbonization and we need it faster and more pronounced. So on this figure to the right, you'll see the darker colors become the more, let's say, more ambitious the decarbonization needs to happen. So this is the time of the excess and its carbon intensity of final energy production on the y-axis. And you would see that the blue scenarios are the 1.5 degree, and there's some overlap with different probabilities of staying below 2 degree scenarios. But particularly in the near term, they all just know one direction is going down. So basically, the near term actions are different, but not so substantial different. And reaching 1.5 degrees basically is a question of tackling the issue even with a more rigorous approach. So this is another figure from this paper. I want to very quickly talk you through that. It's basically telling you something that the differences in effort that are required to get from a 2-degree pathway, which is certainly what the Paris could entail, to a 1.5 degree pathway by 2100. Just to explain how you should see this, so in the grayish block there in the middle is actually the effort that would be required for 2 degrees, and then there's sectoral approaches that tell you how much more effort in what sector is required to get to 1.5 degrees. And there are cost metrics there in purple at the top, and then these grayish metrics further down as CO2 reduction metrics. So this is basically giving you 2 dimensions of efforts that are required. And you see very, very strongly that there is a price increase between 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees. So getting to 1.5 degrees by 2100 is more expensive than getting to 2 degrees, and in particular, it is more expensive in near term. Because what you need to do is you need to ramp up your ambition now. You have no time to wait. You need to get emission levels down as soon as possible to realize a 1.5 limit. And you need to do that by tackling also difficult sectors such as transportation and buildings, which are the 2 segments there between, let's say, 3 and 6 o'clock. So these segments there indicate that you need more efforts in sectors that are difficult to decarbonize, that are probably more difficult to decarbonize than the energy sector, but nevertheless need to be tackled if you want to get to 1.5 degree scenario. So you can learn something about what is required, but it tells you that there is no substantial difference also in terms of technology requirements. So one thing that is, for example, very often discussed also in the climate policy debate is the need for negative emissions. And this is also indicated there with this nice economic cumulative CDR, which is between 9 and 10, the segment up there. And this means carbon dioxide removal. That's the cumulative requirement for carbon dioxide removal of the 20th century. And there is no, the need between 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees is not substantially different. What makes these 1.5 degree scenarios different is that they are reducing more near term and then don't have to rely that much on negative emission technologies for the time to come. So that's basically the major difference that differentiates these 2 sets of scenarios. Having that said, I quickly want to move on to the last part of my talk, which is giving you some information on science that different analytics on differences between 1.5 and 2 degrees in terms of climate index. So this is the Article 2 of the Paris Agreement that you all know very well, which includes the long-term temperature goal that combines a well below 2 degree limit with pursuing efforts to limit warming to below 1.5 degrees, but also has this little appendix, so to say, recognizing that this will significantly reduce the risks and impacts of climate change. And this has not really been a focus of the scientific community so far, but will be in the very near future, because the UNFCCC also in the first meeting called for an IPCC special report on 1.5 degrees to provide further information on that. And we have done a summary perspective, again, in nature climate change, on all aspects that relate to this Paris Agreement temperature goal, so not just on the impacts part, but also on scientific interpretations of the language that is in there, on mitigation pathways, and what would entail for technology requirements. But I want to focus now really on this 1.5 plus 2 degree impact bit and talking through some of the key findings that we outlined there, which are not just based on our own analysis, but basically also based on a literature review and assessment of what's out there yet. One thing where we really expect substantial differences between 1.5 and 2 degrees is the occurrence of extreme events and their particular temperatures. So what you see there in this little panel is two bars. One shows the increase in probability, in occurrence probability of a 1 in 1,000 day pre-industrial temperature extreme event. So basically the hottest day in 3 years, and how much more often it would occur now with 1.5 degree, 2 degree warming, with the height of the bar indicating median projections from the climate model ensemble, and these lines indicating the median at 66% uncertainty range. And already on the 1.5 degree warming, the occurrence of such a day in any given year would be about 15 times more likely. So we're really looking into a very, very substantial increase, and this is even projected to double between 1.5 and 2 degrees to nearly 30 times. So this is simply, or not so simply, this is a threshold effect, because we are moving into in a climate that is much more different than what we had in the past. So basically, we are moving into a new climate reality, in particular in some parts of the globe that are seeing particularly strong warming signal and/or are characterized by low natural variability, such as the tropical regions. So there are studies on heat waves coming forward telling us that under 2 degree warming, the average summer will basically be what today would be an unprecedented heat wave. So tropical regions under 2 degrees would look into a new climate regime, really, that is substantially different from what they're experiencing today in terms of temperatures. Similarly, we expect a robust increase in extreme precipitation on the global level. So again, now you know the scheme how this works. So this is below this 1.5 degrees, where it's 2 degrees. There's a comparison between the two, and you see that there's a robust increase. But again, unlike temperatures, precipitation signals are very different across the globe, and also the increase is very different across the globe. And there are regions where these changes are more pronounced than others. And one region that's particularly vulnerable to increases in extreme precipitation is the South Asian region, where you have the South Asian summer monsoon that already today leads to severe flooding events. And you see from this graph that from these projections, this is projected to increase by 10% in intensity, the meteorological intensity of extreme precipitation, and a 2 degree warming compared to what would be the recent past in 1980s, 1967. On the other side, there will also be regions that will experience substantial drying. This will be included the subtropical regions, the Central America, Caribbean, South Africa, Australia, and in particular the Mediterranean region, North Africa, Levant, and Southern Europe, where the drying signal is already evident from the observational record, but it's only projected to intensify. What is shown here is the annual water availability for the Mediterranean. And again, we see a very substantial difference between 1.5 and 2 projected for this region that already now suffers from water scarcity. And we have about a 9% reduction compared to the recent past in the water availability there for 1.5 degree sea warming, and this was nearly doubled to 17% under the 2 degree warming. So again, while there might not be a very strong global difference for individual regions, the difference between 1.5 and 2 degree can be very, very pronounced. In addition to that, we know that the ocean, and particularly the marine ecosystems, are very vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, not just because of the warming signal, but also because of the absorption of CO2 and the ocean acidification that will affect marine ecosystems in a very severe way. And one very unfortunate example of this is our scientific understanding of the future of the coral reefs. So this is shown here. These are reefs at risk of long-term degradation due to extreme temperatures between 1.5 and 2, and you see basically that that doesn't look good. So this is all, it's the percentage of reefs globally, and under 2-degree warming scenario, it's usually all of these reefs are at risk of long-term degradation. And for 1.5 degree, there might be some window left open for ecosystem adaptation, and some hope that probably our projections may not play out as badly as we currently have reason to believe. In addition to that, while these unique and precious systems would be lost, and it would be a major catastrophe for the ocean ecosystems, there are obviously also livelihoods depending on the ecosystem services that these provide, and be it tourism, be it fisheries, particularly coastal communities and small life states, greatly depend on tropical qualities as a main source of income. So we've summarized these and other findings, such as long-term sea level rise and projections for agricultural yield in tropical regions in this paper, and this now very large graph that I don't want to talk you through in all the details. But what is really apparent from this analysis, and you'll find this on the webpage, and I'm very happy to send you copies of this individual publication if you're interested, is that there are discernible differences between intakes at 1.5 and 2 degrees C already emerging from the literature and the scientific understanding we're having now, and it's particularly the tropical regions that will bear the brunt of these differences. In addition, maybe the Arctic regions and Arctic systems that will strongly be impacted. And also there is more science that we expect to come forward. So this is basically the first step published this year, just a few months after the Paris Agreement, where we expect to come much more science to come forward in time for the IPCC 1.5, especially report that I mentioned before, that will be published in 2018, just in time for the facilitated dialogue on the Paris Agreement. There has been a scientific scoping meeting in August on this, and there will be an IPCC plenary in just about a month's time, deciding on the content of this, and then we have a better understanding of what kind of scientific information we would expect to come forward from this particular report. But there are major scientific efforts underway to improve our understanding of the differences between 1.5 and 2. And one that's particularly prominent is a project coordinated in Oxford in the UK on how to do additional warming prognosis for any projected impacts called CAPNIP. And Climate Analytics is also involved in this one, and we'll continue therefore to update you with the most recent information on differences in impacts between 1.5 and 2 degrees. With this, I'll hand over to my colleague Marcia, who will give you much more insights on what 1.5 degree entails in terms of feasibility and prospects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carl. So I guess you got a lot of information with this first presentation, lots of background information. Now we will welcome to the stage Dr. Marcia Rocha. Marcia is the head of our climate policy analysis team and one of the key figures behind the climate action tracker projects that you may know has been rating the pledges made by countries since the agreement. It's an inter-organizational collaboration that is leading the way in helping us to understand the global impact of climate policies and mitigation pledges by countries. Marcia is an expert in advanced data analysis and modeling and provides scientific and policy expertise to our stakeholders in the UNFCCC negotiation. She leads the climate analytics work on understanding the implication of the Paris Agreement, and she will tell us more about that in our presentation. And I have to say it's a pleasure to welcome a woman on the stage for gender balance. Marcia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Letitia, for this introduction, and Carl for your presentation. So as Letitia mentioned, I will address you today. I will continue to discuss a few aspects of the feasibility of the 1.5 degree pathways, but we'll mainly focus on the benefits of getting onto an emissions pathway that is consistent with limiting warming to 1.5 degree pathway. So in COP in Paris in 2015, 195 countries have agreed to jointly pursue efforts to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. So in the years leading to the COP, but of course increasingly since the COP, the scientific community has been concerned and dealing with questions relating to the feasibility of the 1.5 degree limits, the differences between what we need to do to get to 1.5 compared, for example, to the previous 2-degree target, but also higher warming levels, and also the benefits. Of getting to 1.5, to limiting only to 1.5 degrees. So in this presentation, I'll try to elucidate some of these questions based on work that we're doing with climate analytics, producing and analyzing data, but also synthesizing the scientific literature that is out there. So where do we stand now? If emissions would grow now in an unconstrained manner in a baseline scenario, that is a scenario without the complete absence of climate policy, we would be looking at a temperature increase of about up to 4.8 degrees by the end of the century. But thank God this is not the world that we're looking to. We are aware of the issue of climate change, and climate policy is happening and being implemented around the world. And our with currently implemented policies worldwide, we see that there is an improvement to baseline, but we are still looking, we would still no more than what has been done up to now would be doing. We would be still looking at a temperature increase of up to 3.8 degrees by the end of the century. With climate pledges, so emissions reductions pledges under the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris pledges, we can see yet another deviation downwards from currently implemented policies. So this means that with the pledges, currently cannot just rely on what they're doing, they need to do more, they need to be able to go beyond. The temperature increase would lower, but would still be far beyond what we need to do to get to 1.5 degrees. So what is clear is that what we're doing, it does have an effect, it does trigger a deviation from baseline and currently implemented policy scenarios, but the rate of transition, the current positions of these policies is really not far from quick or strong enough to bring us where we need to be. If we focus in these, so first half of the graph, say the next 2 decades, for example, up to 2030, what is striking is that emissions with Paris pledges, they're still going up, where to get to 1.5, the agreed long-term temperature goal, we should be going down. So this also means that in the years ahead, the speed of this transition and the strength of climate change policy worldwide needs to be enhanced, and this would be actually crucial for us to get to 1.5. So as Carl already explained thoroughly in his presentation, both there are technical and economical feasible solutions or ways to get to 1.5 degrees. But these, so what are the essential differences when we look at the emissions levels of these 2 scenarios? So a key number is when does the world reach zero emissions? So zero emissions meaning that the collective emissions and removals are zero. And what are the differences between 2 degrees and 1.5? So for global greenhouse gases emissions, in the 2-degree world, they need to reach zero between 2080 and 2100, whereas in the 1.5 degree world, this would need to happen approximately 20 years earlier. If we focus on the energy sector, emissions will need to reach zero, CO2 emissions will need to reach zero between 2060 and 2075, and for 1.5 degrees, this would need to happen between 10 to 15 years earlier. So as Carl already mentioned, the technology, 1.5 degrees means actually the very same technologies as 2 degrees. The difference is that the deployment needs to happen sooner and at a faster pace. For both scenarios, it is also clear that the sooner we start cumulatively, so if we look at the cost of the whole century, they will be lower. So we need to start sooner so that the costs overall are lower. All right, so how does that relate to where we are heading now, where countries are heading now with their climate plans? So if we look at the world today, we have a very heterogeneous picture, actually, of the extent to which countries' climate plans actually align or are in line with the 1.5 degree goal. So here, the darker the blue, the higher the alignment. So we have a few frontrunners or early movers, such as Costa Rica or Morocco, for example, which already have put forward climate plans that are very close to what is adequate, of what is in line with 1.5 degree goals. And of course, on the other side, we also have laggards, such as Russia or Australia or South Africa, which still need to improve and yet mobilize national resources and fully tap national potentials to start realizing the benefits of the 1.5 degree goals. And so this, from now on, I will focus actually on the benefits of actually getting into a pathway that is consistent with 1.5 degrees. All the results that I show here, and they are subject of a publication that will come out in Marrakesh. It's a report that we work together in collaboration with UNDP, but you get a very first-hand on the results. Okay, so the climate policy, what is clear, what we know is that climate policies are not a burden. On the contrary, getting onto 1.5, getting onto low carbon development and implementing strong and effective climate policy is very much support strategies for economic growth and poverty reduction. And this is because low carbon development and avoiding the impacts and getting into low carbon developments is actually associated with a number of benefits that can also offset actually the costs of implementing those very the stronger carbon policies. So how are these costs actually avoided, and what are the overall benefits of getting to 1.5? So, of course, climate impacts would be reduced, and with that, the costs of the impacts would also be reduced. So lower warming pathways, they also mean lower needs for adaptation, for example, and also they mean extending the time spent for implementing effective climate policy. So this, of course, strong climate policy, strong measures that would avoid the damages. So leading to, of course, more resilient economies. Cleaner air will also lead to great benefits to the health of citizens. Countries, as they start exploiting their own renewable energy potential with their renewable energy sources, they also become more energy secure, and also because they decouple their economies from volatility of, for example, fossil fuel prices, these economies would also become more stable. There's enhanced energy access because of the logistics advantages of renewable energies, and even job creation. There are higher levels of job creations in this process. So I will go over in a bit more detail a few of those benefits, but more you will be able to find in our report that we published in about 6 weeks. All right, so what does 1.5 degree means now for one, let's say, very concrete and aspects of the energy transformation needed, as we've all heard that we need to phase out coal. So these graphs, they show the relationship between the current operating coal capacity and the planned coal capacity. So dark gray the operating capacity and light gray the planned capacity in these 4 regions in the world. And they compare that with the allowances under 1.5 and 2 degree goals coming from the models. So we can see that we have a very different pictures for the different regions in the world. For the EU and the OECD, so especially developed countries, the currently already implemented operating capacity is not in line and is actually is actually above the allowances under the 1.5 degree compatible allowances. This would mean that the coal power plants need to shut down earlier, early retirement, power plants not operating until the end of their lifetime, no return investments, stranded assets, reward. For China, we have an intermediate scenario where the 1.5 degree allowance is broadly in line with the current operating, so the power plants that are operating and already built, but all plant capacity would surpass that allowance. So pretty much anything, any new coal capacity cannot be built in China. For the rest of the world, we have a very different picture. Very interestingly, the allowance of 1.5 today are actually in the models given to the rest of the world, so including many developing and most of the developing countries, the allowances are above the currently operating, but this picture changes very quickly. By 2030, for example, the operating capacity would need to start going offline. But what is really striking is that any plant capacity, of course, would largely surpass those allowances, and meaning that these countries that have they need to seize the opportunity now where they're developing, they need to expand their energy markets and not lock in new emissions intensive infrastructure. So the current expansion of coal that we have today is absolutely not consistent with the current budget under 1.5 and 2 degrees. And what are the alternatives? So this map shows us the renewable potential in the countries, mainly wind, onshore wind, and solar potential. And for example, current renewable energy potential in large emitters such as the US, China, and India, which are colored light blue, they can be up to 10 times higher than their current energy use. So, and when we move to darker blue colors, this potential, the national energy potential can be up to 40 times higher than the current energy used in these countries. So it is very clear that virtually all countries in the world have a very, very high renewable potential that remains unexploited. And generally, this potential is much higher than total energy consumption today, meaning that there is really plenty of room for growth. And of course, using and exploiting the renewable energy sources would lead to more energy security, as countries would exploit their own energy well at, of course, an affordable price. So a 1.5 degree world means wide action. It means everyone on board. It means collective and concerted global action. So for the price of technologies, here we have one example, which is the price of solar panels over the past since the capacity installed over compared with prices. As installed capacity increases, as we can see in the green area, this is what we have now, not projected. We have a very steep decrease in prices, and with the projections of new capacity coming online, these prices will continue to decrease, meaning that technologies will become more affordable. Everyone is on board, more affordable, and more and possible to all. So also moving away from fossil fuel and decoupling economies from the volatility of the price of fossil fuels is one of the very large benefits of getting into a 1.5 degree pathways. So in this graph, the colored lines are countries and the percentage of fuel imported over total imports in the country, and the shaded blue area of the oil prices. So we can see that, of course, it's very related for countries that are relying largely on fossil fuels. And so moving away from fossil fuels and actually expanding renewables and untapping the renewable potential existing in countries will not only reduce this dependency, but also will reduce the vulnerability of these economies to the international price volatility. So one other benefit is health, actually. So as we've heard, many cities have been, especially in Asia, have been dealing with very serious problems related to air pollution. The World Health Organization estimates that only in 2012, there has been 3 million deaths, premature deaths, caused by outdoor pollution. So this map gives us air pollution levels in the world, with darker colors meaning higher levels. As we can see, the WHO guideline is all the way down there. We have 98% of cities in low and middle income countries that do not meet the WHO air quality guidelines. But 1.5 degree compatible climate action would eliminate this risk, meaning that there would be savings associated with reduced mortality, which would largely offset the cost of stronger climate policies. So just to wrap up, so there are clearly no technological, economic, or scientific barriers to get to 1.5 degrees is feasible, and ambitious and effective climate policies are in line with 1.5 will lead to a wide range of benefits. So just to recap the benefits that we've seen here today, there is virtually unlimited renewable potential in many countries in the world, which notably solar and wind, which are extremely abundant and that remain unexploited, but if exploited to their full potential would lead to much more economic stability, more energy security, and thereby also reducing air pollution and reducing the associated mortality with that. So this is a great opportunity. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Marcia. We will move to our third presentation. Florent Barge, who's also working with Climate Analytics in Berlin, is our development economist and leads our work on climate change and development, adaptation, disaster risk management. He has contributed to various publications, including for the World Bank, for UNEP, for the UN Economic Commission for Africa, and actually his work focuses mostly on Africa. He has also supported the least developed countries group in the climate negotiation. He is currently a guest researcher at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Change and at CESIFO in Munich. So, Florent, you have the floor.
Thank you, Laetitia. Thank you, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here today. I'm going to get you through some of the work we've been doing over the last 2-3 years on the connection between climate and economic impacts and development. Since we're in New York, and since this is a Climate Week and this is a General Assembly starting today, we thought it would be somewhat appropriate to make some kind of a connection to the SDG process of Sustainable Development Goals. But also started last year. So without waiting too much, what are we thinking when we are looking to climate and the SDGs? First, the SDGs. I'm guessing that here many of you are working on the SDGs, either as diplomats or as consultants, or think tanks, trying to connect these different issues and even these different targets together. What do they entail in terms of development for the countries and what's going to happen in the countries? Working a lot with Africa, as Laetitia has been mentioning, the issue is not really taking off at the moment. There is no real discussions in the countries on the SDGs, but this is a long-term time frame. We're looking at 2030. So I'm guessing and I'm assuming that progressively later into this time frame, progressively we'll talk more and more about this issue. So these are the 17 goals with a number of indicators and targets, which may also pose some issues with respect to reporting on the SDGs in some countries. And I think what is very important when looking into the past and looking into like the recent past into 2015 is that there is a very ambitious agenda coming out of this year, which was really exceptional, let's say, in terms of progress internationally on development and climate. There is the Paris Agreement, of course, my colleagues talked about it. There is the SDG framework, and also there is the Sendai framework that all put together looks into similar issues, but in different ways. The question is, how do they connect, and how can we make them connect better? They're like wide-ranging goals when looking into the SDGs, like ending poverty to life below water. So it's not exactly the same stakeholders that we are going to be talking to, but still they're like very important issues. And what is also very important to mention, we're like looking into these connections between these agendas and between these different frameworks, is that the majority of the goals are dependent on a stable climate. So we're thinking about health, we're thinking about growth, we're thinking about water, and then also poverty, and also in terms of hunger and so on. Like all these issues are connected to a stable climate. So there are two questions for this presentation that I'm going to show you like progressively. Is like, could climate change prevent or like substantially slow the achievement of the SDGs? And I'm going to show some work on growth and some work on like multidimensional development, and how these different agendas support each other in ensuring sustainable development. We should make sure like we don't end up working in silos and exclude different issues, and disaster risk management, the sustainable development on the SDGs and the climate with the UNFCCC, like making sure that there's some real connections across these different agendas moving forward in terms of development and sustainable development. So now I'm going to tell you about some of the work we're doing on climate change and increasing growth, and climate change and growth, also looking into inequalities. As you know, and I guess depending on the countries you're coming from, you may have even experienced this type of events like climate-related disasters. We can think about droughts in Eastern Africa, we can think about cyclones in the Caribbean, or in the Philippines, have led to significant decrease in terms of GDP growth over the last years. Like also significant decrease in terms of GDP, and also significant increase in terms of poverty. And poverty not just in terms of income, but poverty in terms of the multidimensional poverty. What we see and what we've been acknowledging in recent years, and also like in many publications and also in many surveys in the countries, like in disaster, from demographic health surveys and so on, is that like poor people are usually on the forefront of the impacts. They're like the one having the most vulnerable livelihood, like very either like agricultural dependent livelihoods, so like there's a job or their incomes that could have gotten from the fields, limited ability to cope and ability to adapt. There is usually limited education level, limited financial means to cope or like to get a better house. And on top of that, very often it's like marginalized populations within the country. So all these things put together make the poor people like particularly exposed in terms of poverty, but of course connected to reduced inequalities like the SDG number 10, and also I think the SDG number 1 on ending poverty. And then the question, I guess we all know the answer, but it's worth asking it. It's will climate change and climate-related disaster affect countries' ability to reach SDG 8 and SDG 10? This would be the only conceptual slide of my presentation, and I think it's worth making sure we all talk about the same thing when we're thinking about climate and the economy. I've been putting on one side here of the key stressors, so temperature and heat, droughts, floods, cyclones, and storms, and then also sea level rise. We haven't experienced yet significant sea level rise in the recent years, but it's something we start accounting for when we're thinking about economic impacts. And then like there are three vectors that we communicate this effects or like these stressors towards the overall economy and the SDGs. We have productivity, labor productivity, we also have social productivity, but the matters, we have disruption and damages to capital, and we also have business disruption. Business disruption, we could argue as economists that it's close to be the same thing, but let's not argue here now, maybe later. And when all of them put together do affect the country's economies and the SDGs. And let me just give you an example. For example, when we're talking about floods or droughts, I'm going to take droughts as the easiest one. Droughts in the agricultural sector, basically. If it's a mild drought, basically you're just going to see a decrease in productivity of your field. You have 1 hectare, usually producing, I don't know, 100 kilos of rice, but it could be like 100 kilos of wheat, and instead of 100 kilos, you're just going to collect or yield 80 kilos per case, whereas with drought, like reducing your mobility. But it could also be a very severe drought and everything is burned on the ground. And there is nothing left. And we can go into a loss in productivity. We'll go in terms of destruction or damage to that people, like everything is lost for this year. So we can do the same for all the different types of units. Temperature, I think I was told that this year it was way too hot for workers in New York to work outside. So this kind of things that we're already experiencing, but are going to happen more and more into the future if we do not adapt. And then when we put all these elements together into some kind of modeling framework, because this is what we call economists, we are looking into what are the costs, how much is going to cost the humanity, how much is going to cost the world, and how much is going to cost countries. And I'm going to be extremely quick on this one because this is not the core of the work that we are doing. It's a very short assignment we did last year for Oxfam International, trying to cost the INDC gap. So like in the presentation of Marcia, you've seen the work of a climate action tracker that's trying to look at what is the direction we are taking in terms of emissions, in terms of warming. And then we compared it to a low warming scenario, the RCP 2.6 scenario, the blue line here. And then we used a model from the 90s called DICE, which is regional deviation called RICE. And then we try to measure the costs of climate change globally in this global. And then we find this about like 0.7% or 0.8% of global GDP in 2100 for the low warming scenario, and we find about like 2.7% of global GDP in 2100 in the high warming scenario. And it sounds like hell of a lot, but if you compare to a couple of figures I'm going to give you now, it doesn't sound too much. 3.7 trillion, it's less than everything which is exchanged every day on the financial market just for foreign currencies. So I think we exchange like about 5 trillion a day. So basically, $11 trillion it's 2 days of transactions. Like just put it into a context. And it sounds like a lot, but when we compare to financial exchanges, when we compare to the money available like in the financial market or like in different government budgets and so on, it's not so much. And then when we look into Africa, it's significantly higher, with the continents significantly more vulnerable. The same for India, like between 3.3 and 3.5% of these countries' GDP, or continental GDP, sorry. But then there were like very new publications, I think in 2015 and in 2014, 2015, and there is more and more coming up now. And more people are looking, like more and more economists looking into some action climate impacts on economic development and economic growth. And the estimate I was just showing you, and I have to move away from the microphone, is here. This is the estimate that we have since that we've been working on for the last 10 years. This is like very close to zero. This is about like 2 or 3% of global GDP. In a recent paper published in Nature by Berkey et al., we see that the range of estimates would go from the yellow line to the red line. This is what we could say could be potential impacts of climate change into the future, moving into a very much warmer world by the end of the century. And they looked into like the high warming scenario, the RCP 8.5 scenario. So this would be the end of the century. And this looks very high, and there are some reasons to that, like scientific reasons to that we don't need to discuss now, but there is a growing body of evidence that shows like what we thought were potential estimates, or like the potential risk induced by climate change in developing countries or even developed countries could be a large underestimate. And like there is this publication by Dale, there is also an OECD report that looks into the same direction. And then there is also some work we've been leading for UNEP, Jamaica, and the African Development Bank that looks into exactly the same thing, like the effect of climate-related disasters, not just temperature, but also droughts and floods on GDP in different countries, in all the countries in Africa actually. And then we've been clustering them together into different regions. And you see some of the effects, like in this range here, could be up to 15% losses in GDP. So it's difficult to understand this 15% because it's a cumulative deviation. Let's say if every year you lose 1% of your GDP, if you look in 2030, you will lose about 15% of your GDP. So this is how we've been accounting. And then if you only look into the GDP growth, like which is lost on a year-to-year basis, this is between 0.06% in the low warming scenario, so like the upper bound, in Western Africa, to up to 0.8% decrease in annual growth into Eastern African countries into the high warming scenario in 2030s. So we see it doesn't seem like a lot, like 0.8%, for countries which are planned to grow between 6 and 8%, even 6 and 10%, thinking about Ethiopia. But when you accumulate this very small change over time, this ends up being like a significant change for the country, a significant deviation from what could have been the GDP of these countries without climate change. And I guess this now looks very much like a very critical question, like will climate change, climate-related disasters affect countries' ability to reach SDG 8, like decent growth, and SDG 10, on reducing inequalities? I would say this is very likely, and we have a growing body of evidence that would be extremely likely there is no real adaptation, real disasters can actually be like seriously implemented in developing countries or developed countries. And now I'm also going to, even though I'm an economist, I'm not just interested in the dollars, I'm also interested in people, and also like in multi-dimensional development, and looking at the different things that do make life a livable life, not just about GDP. And then we did some work also for United and FDB, looking into other SDGs, which were actually the core of the MDGs. So looking into the one on poverty, into hunger, into health, into education, also in clean water and sanitation. And then we've been copying, let's say, an expression from the World Bank president, who was saying climate change has the potential to roll back development. Say, okay, so let's try to measure it. So this is what we try to do with the team, like with team work on economics and climate analytics. And we've been developing this multidimensional development index that comes for education, health, income, and standards of living, and developing also this rollback risk metric. So basically trying to measure in years what would be the effect of climate change and climate-related disasters in different countries in Africa. And then like the main question here is like beyond growth and climate change and disaster, the potential to disrupt development prospects and achieving the SDGs. And wide numbers of SDGs, like we're focusing on GDP. And this is what we find, and I hope you can see it. So this is on African countries, so I'm very sorry if your country is not showing up in the list. And this is what we've done like for 2030s, and in the low warming scenario, so like 1 degree to 1.6, 1.7 degrees of warming by the end of the century, and the high warming scenario leading to 4.5, 4.6 degrees of warming by the end of the century. And then we've been running our model, trying to put some blood environment for temperature, for precipitation, looking into GCM data from different models, and then trying to account for the different countries. And this is what we found. And I only want to focus on the far end, talking about like very extreme change. What we find for the Sahel countries in the low high warming scenario, so namely Mauritania, Chad, Mali, and Senegal, I don't know if you can read from what you stand, is that we could see a very severe rollback in terms of development, like even like rollback like as going even before 2015. And for two reasons, basically, and especially for Senegal. Senegal is going to be extremely affected by drought. Senegal is going to be extremely affected by heat, and going to be extremely affected by floods. All of them combining together into the same place around the 2020s, 2030s in the high warming scenario. On top of that, what we found in this record analysis is that the Sahel countries, despite the growth we've been experiencing in the recent years, they have been not extremely good. And I know there is no one from these countries here. They haven't been extremely good at improving the level of multidimensional development. So there is no real correlation between the level of GDP growth and the level of multidimensional development. So it means that even with a progressively increasing growth that we can see in the SSDs, like the international GDP scenarios that we've been using, that the improvement in multidimensional development is going to be slow. And on top of that, on top of the slow progressive development, we're going to put very strong pressure coming from climate-related disasters and heat extremes. And what's going to happen in these countries is that we're not going to see development. It's very likely we see like de-development or undevelopment, countries like going backwards. And this is the risk that we see showing up into the high warming scenario in the 2030s, of course, assuming that we will not mitigate, because we can move into the climate, and that we will not adapt, and that we will not implement disaster risk management. And I'm out of time, so we'll be very fast. You know the answer for this one, of course, like yes, and we need to do something about it. And then there is some work. This is some work we're doing with World Bank, so trying to better understand what happens at the country level, look into the different sectors, measuring the risk into different sectors, into different regions of the countries, for different time frames, different scenarios, so that we can help the countries better prioritize the adaptation options and disaster management options. Because there is a pot of money which is available globally, let's say, for adaptation, but this pot of money is not infinite. And there is like $10 billion into the GCF, and we need to make sure that this $10 billion into the GCF will have a maximum effect on the countries in terms of increasing the resilience. So we are providing some kind of information like this to different governments, and I was last week in Ghana, like showing these results, and working with the government like on how we can integrate this kind of information into the development plan, into the disaster risk management strategy, into the adaptation plan, so that like we can better focus the attention on the money on the places which are most vulnerable in terms of development, also in terms of future GDP growth. And then to my question, like the initial question, like about climate for the SDGs, I would say unfortunately yes, but we can mitigate the yes by like mitigating at the maximum. So like keeping temperature like well below 2 degrees in direction to 1.5 degrees would significantly decrease the risk in terms of development in these countries. This is the first part, but this is a large part. Then there is a second yes. So like this is there is a second yes, and like how do we connect these different agendas? Like do we need to correct these different agendas? And I think the main sentence here is that United the stand, we can potentially do something because we need development to adapt. We need money to adapt basically, and also we need money from the countries to adapt. But divided them will fall. There will be no sustainable development. There is no connection between climate change agenda or the SDG or disaster risk management agenda. And then, in terms of very simple recommendations, because I guess you already make them for yourselves, first we need to keep warming towards 1.5, well below 1.5 even if it's possible, so like the Article 2 of the Paris Agreement. And then also, and this is something that will take time, I guess, in most of these countries, like better integrating this kind of information, like supporting the prioritization of adaptation options. Because if you go to the countries, and I guess you're coming from them as well, sometimes the prioritization process of the adaptation options is just a reflection of the power struggle within the administration or within the government. The stronger ministry with the biggest share of the adaptation money. But if the strongest ministry also going to be the map of the future, it's not sure. And we see something we see a lot with agriculture in many other countries, which is a very important sector of the economy, which is taking a lot of resources for adaptation, but without looking at the other sector, for example, energy, which is extremely important as well in terms of resilience of the other sectors of the economy. So I leave the presentation here with these two yes. Yes, we can do something, and also yes, we need to gather, or like we need to make sure like all these different agendas communicate at least. And I hope we're together into the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Florent. We have about 10-15 minutes for questions to our presenters. I will invite them to join me here. And while you are sharpening your questions, the presentations will be available on the website very soon. And if you can't wait, please give us your contact details, and we will find a way to send them to you in the coming days. We don't have a mic that we can circulate in the room, but there's one over there if you wish to stand and walk to the mic, or you can just simply speak up. So please introduce yourself and organization, and yes, we're looking forward to your comments and questions, reactions. Dr. Oppenheimer?
I'm Michael Oppenheimer. Marcia, on one of your slides towards the end, you showed essentially what individual regions, how close they were to meeting the objective in the coal world, essentially. That is, what the difference was between what their plans were and what would be done to meet 1.5 to 2 degrees. What sort of burden sharing would you assume with that?
So it's a least cost approach. So the allowances are really coming from message model. So this is data that we get from Renewable publication from 2015. So the split is really done based on the least cost approach.
Another question in the back.
Hi there, my name is John Rose, and I'm asking my question for the History of Security Studies, where I'm a research associate. I'm wondering, or if you could expand a little bit on linking what your comments about the SDGs and the hard progress we take on this, what that means for peace and security.
And I'm going to hand over to Carl. It's my answer, seriously. It's been working a lot on peace and conflict recently on climate disasters. Just a very short note on this one. I haven't done any work on that at the moment. But in the work we are doing on Ghana, for example, what we found in discussion with governments, in discussion with World Bank and other stakeholders, is that like one of the key impacts of climate in this country is going to be a significant shift of people from the northern regions of the country, which are the poorest one, and also like the most agricultural one, and the Sahelian regions as well. So like very strong climate signal coming into this region towards the cities. And what we see currently in Ghana, and especially in Accra, is that there is no capacity at all to host all these people because you like you have a lot of people coming into the slums, a lot of people being super unhappy about government policies and so on and so forth. So this is a trend that we find like we could find in the countries. And then I can give over to Carl, who can give you like a bit more details on this research. Yeah, maybe just to add to what Florent was just saying, and already basically going into processes that may or may not play a role at the individual country level. I think when talking about conflict risks emerging from climate signals, it's there's no clear-cut answer to that. It's very context-dependent, and there is obviously this strongly relates on the individual circumstances these countries or find themselves in, and also on the climate stressor and how this interacts with, for example, inequalities and development issues within countries. Our colleagues from the Potsdam Institute have done a recent study on natural disasters, climate natural disaster occurrence and armed conflict outbreak that came out in GNS this year in July. And what we found, so basically what we were looking at, we were searching for a question if there's an increased risk of conflict outbreak in the same month where there is a natural disaster occurrence within the same country. And what we find is that there is no evidence for a trigger regardless of the country situation. So we don't find any evidence that if there is a natural disaster occurrence, there's kind of a natural law that will lead to a conflict, which is, I guess, very much in line with what other literature is showing, and actually also with kind of common sense understanding of how our societies work and how they're able to function or not to function. However, what we found is that for the condition that there is a conflict outbreak, there has been a higher occurrence of natural disasters in the same month. So basically, to translate it into plain English, it didn't help. So we can at least say the occurrence of natural disaster in these countries didn't help and probably increased the risk. And there's again, let's say, you can make this very clear how this may probably will interact. For one, give a few examples, and we've looked into different disasters, and we'll find this particularly strongly for meteorological disasters, so that we have drought in particular in heat waves, climatological, sorry. And we also found this to be particularly pronounced for ethnically fractionalized countries, which we found very surprising compared to other, let's just poverty or other indicators that we looked into. And we emphasized, and this is also something that you'll find in conflict literature, that along ethnic boundaries, in the case of an abroad, impact on societies, such as a natural disaster that happens on a very fast timescale compared to other shocks that societies may experience, that these ethnic boundaries may serve as predetermined conflict lines, across which there probably will be enhanced risk of conflict outbreak. So this is what we found there. So it's a very, let's say, a mixed result, not indicating that there is any clear-cut relationship, but certainly also saying that there is, if you design future security policies, you may better take climate change into account, which is probably something that we all need to do.
Hi, my name is Devin Carroll from the Stanley Foundation. This question is for Dr. Rocha. On the renewable energy potential graph that you showed, you mentioned wind and solar were the main renewable sources, but were there others that were incorporated into that, and which one?
Yes, so we'll show a higher resolution with the different sources in the final report, where we looked into onshore wind, offshore wind, hydro, and solar. Those are the 4 sources that we used, and as a source we used the final, the latest IRENA database for that.
Thank you very much. My name is Tanya Barichin. I come from WWF International. I'd like to thank you for all your presentations. I found them really enlightening. I've got a couple of reactions and questions, and one question essentially. In terms of the reaction, I really appreciated the aspects around integration of the SDGs and the climate aspects cutting across all the SDGs. I think that's something that we should be looking into, and that's the approach that we've been taking as WWF as we were advocating for the SDGs framework, but also going beyond maybe some of these policy frameworks and maybe looking at, for example, the G20 that happened recently, because as you said, Masha, the potential is there, but in terms, and frameworks are there, but it's how do we turn these into actual real actions? In terms of the G20, for example, for phasing out fossil fuel subsidies, the pledge is there, but in terms of the commitments, it hasn't followed through. Another aspect that I wanted to draw your attention to was the G20 action plan for the SDGs, which is actually quite a positive development. So the question now is, how do we mobilize the decision makers to take real climate action?
This is for me.
It's for everyone.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I tend to agree with all your comments. On the policy making side, I can only tell you from my own experience of work we do, which is more at the national level. At the national level, I guess maybe my colleagues were more working on international fora can do a bit more about the G20. What I see progressively in the countries that we're working with in Africa is that at the government level there is this awareness that the 1 billion is sustainable development without addressing the climate issue. Like many of these countries that work have been affected by droughts, by floods, by cyclones for some of them, and they know they want to keep on developing, they will have to take these issues into account. So this is the first thing. So there is awareness, this is not the question. The problem is that there is no, or very limited capacity in terms of putting all these elements together. You're talking about framework. I'm thinking more like development modeling. I'm thinking more like demographic modeling. I'm thinking more like regional development, integration with these kind of things. Like the problem is that we are entering a new era, and we are entering it without any tools. Like at the country level, we are basically coming there with nothing. So we are providing some kind of stuff like this that could be integrated into the development plan, but this is extremely limited compared to the needs of the country. So I think this is one of the issues. I see that there is clearly awareness. This is no question about that. I think all the countries are super connected. I can talk for a couple of African countries I'm working with, but in terms of tools, in terms of capacity, there is really nothing. And this is one of the key issues that couldn't maybe not really addressed by the WWF, but that needs to be addressed by the research community. Like moving forward, like how do we implement the SDGs, the climate themes together in the context of development. There's a lot of questions and very limited number of answers at this point.
Thank you, Florent. I think the point about the capacity of developing countries to mainstream climate change into development is a very important issue. Institutional capacity, technical capacity, and so on. And I think also the research that is needed to allow countries to have the data, to be able to project, to make the right decision. Because at the moment, a lot of countries are making very important decisions about their development in a context that is pretty uncertain, where some regions that is simply missing. So I see some foundations in the room. So I think this is something to really prioritize in the coming years to make sure that those countries have the knowledge needed to make the right decision, avoid maladaptation, make the right investment in the infrastructure, and develop long-term strategies. This is already challenging for developed countries to develop their decarbonization plans. So we can just imagine how challenging it is for developing countries, especially those with capacity constraints. We will take one more question from the incoming president of the Conference of the Parties, Morocco, and then we will break for a few minutes.
Okay, so Hamish Academy from the incoming COP22 presidency. My question would be, one of the key takeaways I got from the presentation was that to reach the 1.5 degree objective, early action was direly needed. And I may have had a bit of a tunnel vision, but in the context of COP22, from your perspective, what would be the top 3 outcomes that would facilitate such concrete on-the-ground realization of the ambition that is required to reach the 1.5 degree objective? We can also talk about outside the electricity process, Montreal Protocol, GMBM at ICAO. What, in your opinion, would be the key?
So, from the climate policy side, as Letitia mentioned, I'm very, very strongly involved in the assessment of NDCs. And as I showed in my presentation, they're still very far from where we need to be. And this next 2 decades are very crucial. So stronger enhancing ambition in the INDCs, getting to the 5-year review process, working transparency, so tracking actually the progress of the NDCs, implementation, and then pledge and review, check that against the latest science. Is that working? Is this where we need to be heading? I think this is extremely important assumption that making.
Yeah, maybe just to add that there will be a few processes that obviously need to be started and need to be underway to facilitate that. So one thing would be the 2018 facilitative dialogue that needs to be set up in Marrakesh, that we know what we are saying there and how this is actually supposed to work, because there it is where we have the first opportunity to do exactly what Nassim was just describing, to strengthen INDCs, or basically hopefully have countries coming forward to strengthen INDCs and getting clarity on these processes, getting clarity also. Let's say a lot of other open ends that are left over from COP21 in this context of how to increase midterm efficiency. 1.5 degrees would probably be the overarching objective that would basically be singled out in many different other questions. So I'm not at my head and have a top 3 list for you now, but I'm very happy to think about it a bit further. But I think basically allowing these processes to start, about clarity about processes over the coming years, and particularly how strengthening could be facilitated in a very effective and constructive manner, is I guess the key challenge there, because this is, as you all know, has been kind of left open within the Paris Agreement of sorting our ambition gap out for the years to come. So this is now the big challenge ahead, as we've learned from all our presentations today. Thank you.
Maybe to add to that, one of the clear things that could, the clear outcome that could come out of Marrakesh is clarity on the resources for the implementation. I think for developing countries, it's extremely important to have predictability about the financial resources, but all the means of implementation, basically technical assistance and technology transfer. And we've been talking about the 100 billion per year by 2020 pledged by developed countries. And in Marrakesh, we're expecting some concrete outcome, I believe, from the process that has been initiated to to define a roadmap to get to this 100 billion. I think that will provide some comfort to developing countries to be more ambitious, to go beyond the pledges they have made so far. And I think also for the whole negotiation process in general, that we have to gear up and accelerate the definition of the modalities. It will provide some confidence between the partners to accelerate the work. Go on.
You were asking for 3, but I'm going to give you a 4. I think, still again from this national experience that we have for countries and also living in developed countries, I think I would say one keyword for, or 2 keywords actually for markets would be homework and transformation. Homework is that we've been making a very nice agreement last year, but we need to start implementing it. And starting implementing it in developing countries means mitigation, adaptation, disaster risk management, and so on. But also from this experience with the countries that we do not really see this idea of transformation. We do not really see all these issues coming together of mitigation, adaptation, and development into the same framework. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in this area as well, but we can really support transformation. So it's for us doing research, like in our universities, institutes, whatever, but it's also in the countries trying to better address these issues together, like breaking the silos, breaking the sectors, and trying to connect each other. And again, it's an example of Ghana, is that we might find that one of the best adaptation options for Ghana is renewable energy. So you think maybe I'm being crazy, but no, I'm not. Most of the energy in Ghana is coming from hydro. And in the recent years, because of droughts and heat extremes, like the power has been going down steeply, and there's a lot of power cuts all the time in the country. So which industry, which big group of services going to the country to implement a factory or to implement a new office? No one, because there is no electricity. It's very difficult for them. So there is no investment, there is no jobs, no growth. And this is an adaptation option. But on the other side, the adaptation option is also mitigation option and it's a development option. So you have very clearly co-benefits coming together, but could look like transformation. I think that the key issue now is that, okay, we've been good at the international level, we have extremely good international agreement, we have GCF and all of money which is waiting for it being dispersed. But now I think it's a lot of homework that needs to be done on how we can make real transformation of this project that into development, into mitigation, into adaptation, so that we really start this new era in terms of doing it and implementing it.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we will break for about 10 minutes. So please help yourself to the buffet. Some housekeeping, the restrooms are on my left and on your right. So please don't leave. It's raining anywhere outside. So stay with us. It's cozy in here. And we will be ready to start with our panel in 10 minutes.